me okay? Good? Great. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I'm Mark Nardelli. I'm the principal here at Horace, Mann. It's my 13th year as principal here at this school, and I think, 30th year in Newton. So I am makes you feel old. I spent, I think, almost 18 years at Brown Middle School and then came to elementary school, and I'm loving it. And as you can imagine, coming to school every day, we've got a great group of people, families, students, staff that are here tonight. Appreciate all of you coming out and taking time out of your busy schedules and your evenings. Come on in. To be here to learn more about what some of the challenges and, I think strengths are of this particular school, and why I'm here tonight to talk to you. And so I'm just going to go over a little bit of an introduction, and then I will turn it over to the mayor's team. So, look at that. Wow. Roadies. So we moved to this building in the fall of 2019. Prior to that, we were over at 687 Watertown Street. And I think right now we have almost 360 students, 18 classrooms, 3 classrooms per grade level. There are 2 modular classrooms out here, which count as those 18. We have, I think, close to 70 staff who are here, either full or part-time, and we share this space. I would say that one thing that came with us from the move from the old building is our feeling of family, our feeling of spirit, our feeling of that we really want to be a welcoming and engaging school community. I can't thank the parents enough in this community for their unwavering support for us. You've been advocating for us. At the old building and here, you've provided and appreciated the teachers for all the hard work they've done. And I know the teachers eat, sleep, breathe their work. They talk about it all the time. In fact, we were at a party a few minutes ago, just kind of hanging out to celebrate one of our teachers, Mr. Feldstein, who came back just for this, came over the bridge, and talking about literacy and thinking about different ways that we could be teaching kids, and that's kind of what they do. And I feel really lucky to be a part of that. This is a group that's dedicated to equity and providing and opportunities for all kids, and I again feel really lucky to be part of that. Obviously, there are challenges, and I think part of why we're here tonight is to talk about and highlight some of those challenges. I think I'd put those into 2 categories. The first category is, coming off the pandemic and all of the challenges that came with that. I think we are all faced as a community, not just as teachers or as parents, but together we are faced with thinking about how do we build academic skills, how do we build social emotional skills, reteach routines, reteach how to have conflict and come out on the other end in a reasonable and civil way. That's really, I think, where we're all at as a group, and how do we support each other. And I feel lucky to be in a well-resourced district where we've got amazing literacy intervention programs, and we've got social emotional supports, and we've got Title I funds that support our math intervention program. These are all pieces that we as teachers know are going to be essential to meeting the needs, whatever they might be, of the children as they come to school every day post-pandemic. And that would have been important prior, but we know now, having seen over the past couple of years some of the discontinuity that took place, I think it's really essential that we're able to have a program that will continue to be able to support our kids. And so I know that's really important. And then the second thing I would say is, when you think about this school specifically and the facility, coming from the other building, one of the things that we have found, I think profoundly different, is that building was set up in a way that really fostered a community. You had classrooms that were across from each other all along that hallway, and this building is not laid out that way. It's one long hall, and I think one of the pieces that we have felt are a loss are really around isolation and not being able to collaborate in a way that was just sort of being next to each other and across from each other. So those aren't things that you know when you move into a building, and you don't know them until you live them. And then as we've spent more time here and we've done modifications to the building, you know, we also know that some of the classrooms are too small, right? We also know that the way we teach kids today is all about small group learning and providing intervention targeted to groups of children, and they need space to be able to do that. We're scrambling for space every day. As I mentioned on the tour, we've got my office is full. The office next door is full. Every small room that we have is full all day long, every single day. And often we are looking, in fact today I was moving people around to try to find space for people to be, so that they could conduct an evaluation or finish their work with a small group. Those are the things that we're dealing with. Storage is another one. Even the fact that we're in this cafeteria right now, right? We're not in the gym because we want to have our gymnastics program, but it limits our options in ways that other schools don't have to think about. They can have big group meetings, staff meetings every month. We think about where do we have those? Where do we have special events? Our food and culture night this month, we had to reschedule it because we just didn't have the space to have multiple events running at the same time. So again, it's not going to change who we are. These teachers work really hard, and you know, they love what they do, and they work together, and they love working together, and we're going to continue to do that. But we also are hoping that we can have a space where we can do that to the best of our ability, and in a time where I think learning is, you know, in this day and age where we want the space to reflect the learning that has to happen. So I'm going to end there and finally just say, again, thank you to the families and the parents who are here tonight. Thank you for your ongoing support. You're amazing, and I appreciate your advocacy on our part. I know many, 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 many hours have gone into this over the last couple of years, and we wouldn't be able to do it without you. So thank you. I hope you have an informative evening, and thanks for coming. I'm going to turn it over to the mayor. Thank you.
Actually, can we thank Mark one more time? As Mark said, I'm very, very grateful that you carved out an evening out of busy lives. Many of you with youngsters at home, I know how hard it is to find a partner or find a babysitter to stay there, so I'm grateful. And I think we have a bunch of teachers in the house. If you're a teacher, can you raise your hand? Huge thanks to the teachers. As well, Mark sang your praises as he should. And for those of you who are standing, you're probably doing that intentionally. You had a long day of not being able to stand up against the wall, but feel free eventually to wander over to a chair if that feels more comfortable along the way. I want to make a few introductions, some shout outs. We've got some school committee members in the house. We have our school committee chair, Tamika Olszewski. I see Emily Prenner. I saw Ann Pinkshen in the back. Did I miss anybody? City councilors are with us as well. I saw our president, Susan Albright, right there. I saw Councilor Maria Greenberg give a wave, John Oliver, who's got your back, Maria, and Pam Wright is in the back as well. Lots of people here to answer questions. What Kathy, Aisha, myself, Josh are going to try to whip through a presentation, just set some baseline facts for everybody, but then Q&A, and we'll stay here till the last question is answered, okay? Jim McGonigal and Shauna Sullivan, give a wave. Our Commissioner of Public Works and Deputy Commissioner of Public Works, if you're thinking questions, roads, sidewalks, safety, condition, they're here to help answer. I want to give a shout out to our, and I'm now affectionately going to call you our roadies. Our IT Director, Joe Mulvey, and Greg Ansaldi, our deputy, are here. And not just, I love that they're sitting next to Steve Rotendi, who's all thing IT for MPS. From the city side, Josh Morse is our Public Buildings Commissioner. Jonathan Yo, our COO. And please know Jonathan is a Newton resident who served on the school committee for 8 years. So big, I'm going to let you introduce your team, Kathy, and then just Aisha and Liam.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I'm your interim superintendent, Kathleen Smith. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Principal Nardelli. That was a wonderful opening and truly gives us a background about why we're here and why we need to come together as a community. Again, teachers and parents, it is really an honor. So to introduce my wonderful team that you have here in the Newton Public Schools, I have Dr. Aisha Farag, and she oversees all of our elementary schools, supports all of our principals, is in all of those classrooms, and has deep knowledge about our school district. I have Liam Hurley, who is another one of my assistant superintendents, oversees all of the budget, all of the finances, operations, transportation, facilities, so a lot of things under his umbrella, and again, a lot of knowledge to answer the many questions you will have. And Steve Rotendi was introduced, and again, you'll hear about the technology and did yeoman's work with his team. And when you think about what happened during that pandemic and how quickly we all flew into a mode of making sure kids had, one-to-one devices. I don't think we were quite there in any community, but you made that happen, and it was certainly on the backs of Steve and his team. And I know, Mayor, you already called out your school committee members. I've been in Brockton for 42 years as an educator and finishing up as the superintendent there for 6 years. I'm pleased to be here, but I do have to tell you that you have 9 members, this is including the mayor, on your school committee, and they are hardworking. We have numbers of meetings about many things, not just our regularly scheduled school committee meetings. You have a lot going on in the Newton community this year. So seeing all of you here and knowing that you're going to come together as a community is really important. So thank you, Mayor.
Let me run through the big picture on the override. Kathy and Aisha, with Liam's help, are going to dig in deep on the school portion. You should know, and maybe you probably figured it out, that 75% of the dollars are appropriately going to our Newton Public Schools. The core value here in Newton is all about children, teachers, education. And that's what you're going to see reflected in the choices we made, what to put into an override. As much work as we have ahead and as much change I am interested in and advocating for, I still feel incredibly fortunate to live in Newton and to be able to serve this community and to continuously try to live up to what I believe, which is we want this to be just such a wonderful community to live in, to raise a family in, to work in. I hadn't seen that picture yet. That's very cute. Let me explain quickly what's in the override. There are 3 questions in it. The first two, there are 2 individual questions that are debt exclusion questions. one to fund the rebuilding of Countryside, the other to rebuild the Franklin Elementary School. Debt exclusion overrides feel and seem and are temporary, but it's temporary for a long time. It's for the life of the bonds. We fully expect to bond these for 30 years, so it's for 3 full decades. Once the bonds are paid off, it does roll off the tax base. You will notice that both projects right now, Josh, with help from Liam and architects, have, we believe, a fully inflated number for the 2 schools. Both are roughly $61 million. You will see, though, it's kind of peculiar that why are the override numbers so different? It's because for Countryside, we are part of the state, the Massachusetts School Building Authority process, and we expect them to pay at least 25% of the cost, possibly up to 30%. And in addition, I've put in $1.25 million of ARPA funds to get the design going. And you will remember that the Northland project, with support from the City Council, we got Northland to kick in $1.5 million to the Countryside project as well. That lowers the cost to the taxpayers. I'm going to give the mic over to Josh, who's going to talk first about Franklin and Countryside. He's going to give the mic back to me because we're going to switch to the operating override. Then I'm going to give it right back to him to talk about Horace Mann.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So the Franklin Elementary School, both Franklin and Countryside are similar in some ways, different in others. We submitted both of these projects to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. In the end, the MSBA selected the Countryside School, but specifically about Franklin. The Franklin School was built in the 1930s. It had multiple additions in the 1950s. Like a lot of schools in Newton and across the country, there was the boom and there were a lot of kids coming. They had to rapidly accelerate, and it saw multiple additions, some of which are in the octagon, as we like to call it. The other was in a class or in a addition that included a gym. Overall, the school has a lot of similarities to the Horace Mann School. It's lacking special education space, support spaces, student spaces, staff support spaces. The specials are all undersized. And one of the primary issues I think about the Franklin School is that it has 6 different levels. The accessibility is extremely problematic. It's 14 feet above the grade of Derby Street, the street that it's on. So it's not to say that you can't get into the building and navigate, but it is very problematic and challenging. So it certainly is not an inclusive design. And I think the other critical issue at Franklin is that there's a lot of programming that's occurring in the basement that was never designed nor intended for teaching and learning. It's become quite problematic over the years, and a lot of the Franklin parents, if you know any, can share stories, and I'm sure the Horace Mann staff, if they haven't heard the stories, could reach out to the Franklin staff and hear about that. So Franklin's got some serious challenges, but also an incredible opportunity. It's a very large site, lots of opportunity not only to address the school program, but to create something very special for the neighborhood over there between field space and playgrounds, you know, passive and active recreation, landscaping, lots of opportunities for the entire neighborhood. The Countryside School is a different project altogether. One of the primary reasons that it was selected by the state, and I will say it was one of 15 schools selected out of 1,800 schools, public schools in Massachusetts. Just to give you a sense as to how needy it is, that is a highly competitive grant, and it was one of 15 out of 1,800 schools. The Countryside School was built in the 1950s. It had additions in 1989, 1990, 1991, 1999, and 2000. All we did in that time period was we doubled the number of classrooms in the school, but added no support space. So we just kept adding classrooms. They can all be found in the modulars, which you'll see in the upper left-hand corner. We just kept adding modular classrooms as the students kept coming, as well as a few annex classrooms, kind of less than ideal construction, slightly more permanent than a modular classroom. But what this did was it expanded the capacity of the Countryside School to be able to handle approximately another 250 students, but it added absolutely no space beyond just the classrooms themselves. It added one toilet, not one bathroom, but one toilet to support 250 students and roughly 40 staff. Everything else had to rely on the original 1950s school, which is kind of the base school that you see when you drive by. Same thing, accessibility is very challenging, lacking student support spaces, lacking special education spaces, a lot of learning in the hallways because they have to. So that is one of the primary reasons that it was selected by the state. Again, lots of opportunity over there to address a myriad of issues, including the chronic flooding that we see in that school. It's built below the water table. A lot of the reason why the modular classrooms look like they do is because they're actually in the wetlands, something that we would never be able to do today. And as you see in the bottom left-hand corner, the school is never dry. There are some pumps that run 24/7. If they fail, I have personally swam through the water. We get about 12 feet of water because we are well below the water table in a matter of an hour or two. Also problematic, because it is so low on the site, we have to pump and grind sewage to get up to the street. I can tell you, when you have 350 or 400 elementary school students and a whole bunch of staff, that is a lot to ask a sewage grinding system to keep up with, and it's problematic and it fails, which is one of the reasons why if you're ever at the Countryside School, that smell that you smell is because we're constantly having to pump sewage out of the building. Those are the primary reasons why the state said that the Countryside School is one of the most neediest in the state. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
I was watching the grimaces as we were talking about the sewage and the smell, and it's real. The reason why people move to Newton as our schools, it's not usually very often the school buildings. It's because of the amazing teachers that we have and leaders. But it is so darn obvious that we have to keep working on the buildings because it's hard to do great teaching and learning when the buildings are so compromised. So in addition to the two individual questions on Countryside and Franklin, there's a third operating override question that has a number of different parts to it. I'm going to go through each one. These are for things that touch us daily, that are the real quality of life, that I'd say the pandemic lifted up and made even more obvious, that our youngsters need support, our oldest residents need support. We've got to move forward with the places outdoors that everybody took advantage of during the pandemic. That's trees, that's parks, fields, courts. You would think in Newton that the number one issue that people would talk to me about would be schools. It isn't actually, it's about the roads. If I'm out and about, and there's a reason for that, so we've got to lean in on that. But the bulk of the dollars in the operating override are for NPS. By the way, operating override, permanent increase in taxes, okay? If you vote yes for this, they jump up for 1 year and then they grow at the usual rate. I'm gonna give it back to Josh to talk about the important both addition and renovation work here at Horace Mann.
Thank you, Mayor. Horace Mann. So hard act to follow, Mark. I appreciate that. So the Horace Mann School, this is a very different situation here than Countryside and Franklin. The Horace Mann School, for anybody that joined me on the tour, heard me say, the primary issue here is we do not have enough space. The school is approximately 50,000 square feet. It's shy of about 22,000 square feet. It is about 50% smaller than it should be based on the student enrollment. It is lacking, as you see here. Classrooms are still undersized. The library is woefully undersized. Special education spaces, much smaller than they should be. And our cafeteria, as we can all tell, is way too small. You know, this building was renovated approximately 10 years ago. It was renovated for a swing school. We did a lot of work in the building, made a lot of investments, but it was renovated for a swing school. It was intended to be a place to stay for a short period of time while you waited for your new school. The Horace Mann School moved here, and in some ways it was an upgrade, in many ways it was not. That's just the reality of the situation. As many of you are aware, there were a lot of lessons learned there. You know, we certainly extended our apologies to the parents and the staff. Since then, we've worked together a lot. See a lot of familiar faces. We've spent a year now working with the Horace Mann community, parents and teachers. A huge thank you to the teachers working hard on the visioning sessions with New Vista and GRA, our architect. We've all rolled up our sleeves to help move this school community forward and help lay the foundation for what we're doing here tonight. I think what's also equally important is a heartfelt thanks. There were many apologies, but I think we owe a thank you to the Horace Mann community, the parents and the teachers. Despite the fact that this school is woefully undersized in many, many ways and lacking in all the areas that Mark talked about and I talked about, the staff have championed on. They've delivered an incredible education to countless students over the last few years. They've done an amazing job, but they've done it in spite of the building. And that's not how it's supposed to work. Buildings are supposed to foster an incredible environment where the teachers can excel, where they can make young minds grow, where they're not trying to work around issues where there's not enough space for a breakout session, or you know, there's too many kids in this room, they're trying to shuffle out of that room, or they're stealing the principal's office for a meeting because there's nowhere to go. We shouldn't have stuff in the hallways. It just creates too much clutter, creates anxiety. We're lacking a lot of those spaces. And I think the other thing that's important to recognize, and this is where my heartfelt thanks is a little more nuanced. The Horace Mann community, the staff, the students, the parents, gave us an incredible gift. And I say us, I speak as Newton. When the Horace Mann School moved to this location, they allowed us to renovate the former Horace Mann School at 687 Watertown Street to become the new preschool. We're just about done with that project. What that allowed us to do is we're going to move the preschool from 150 Jackson, the former Aquinas Junior College, over to 687 Watertown Street. Why is that important? Because 150 Jackson is going to become the new home for the Lincoln Elliott School. We're going to renovate it. It's going to become the new home. Why is that important? Because the old Lincoln Elliott School is going to become the swing space that will enable projects like Countryside and Franklin and so many others to move forward. The gift that the Horace Mann community gave to Newton is our ability to accelerate and to move forward our entire capital pipeline. There are thousands of families that benefited from that move. So it's a huge thank you to all of you, to the staff, to the parents and the students. But now it's time to give back. It's time to move Horace Mann forward, and it's time to build the addition, give us the space that we need, create the small breakout areas, create the clustering that we need in those classrooms, give back that sense of community that you had at 687, and create something very special.
Josh has it just right, doesn't he? That slide shows the addition as it is currently imagined. Design is not done. There's still lots of work to do. And this is currently what the faculty and teachers are beginning to zero in on. But we're going to stay very, very close to all of you and get input from parents as well on exactly how the space should work. And I was asked earlier, so if the override passes, when will Mark be cutting the ribbon? It looks like it's fall of 2026. Do I have that right? Moving on from that, and later, by the way, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody asked the question, so why wasn't it its own debt exclusion question. Ask me later, happy to talk that one through because I certainly have heard that along the way. Streets and sidewalks, 1.4 million. It's a combination of condition and safety. I think it's probably pretty obvious to everyone what work we need to do. I've got to be really clear though, oddly enough, this is not additional dollars, it's finding the dollars. Our CFO, Maureen Lemieux, right now, pieces together funding to do our street and sidewalk work. This is just putting it actually into the budget. Next one is $1 million for everything from athletic fields to courts, tennis, pickleball, basketball, parks, playgrounds. And by the way, I did hear the good news. I heard, am I right? Did the new playground show up? You're really close. Okay, good enough. Will you invite me back? I'm in. But I think I'll let the kids go first. I'll follow them. How about that? And this is all about accelerating maintenance and care. It's probably clear to you as well. We just need more funds to do it. Next one is $500,000 for trees. Please know in the 1980s, we had twice as many street trees as we do today. We're down to about 22,000 street trees. These funds will get us up to about 32,000. It'll jumpstart us in the next 8 to 9 years. It's all about, they're beautiful, but it's also about air quality and canopies for heat resistance. And they actually help with flooding as well. Older residents, this is an additional $500,000. It's all for, almost all for staff. Some would be for transportation, pneumo, that type of thing. We, pre-pandemic, we knew we were way understaffed. We are moving forward just as NECP and Lincoln Elliott is being done without an override dollars. The new senior center is being done with our current debt capacity. This will help allow us to have the right amount of staff in that building. Next one is all about having a guaranteed funding source to shift our municipal buildings, both school and city side, away from fossil fuels onto electricity. The first two projects we expect to do is one at the library and the others at the Pierce School, which is our last school on oil. With that, I'm gonna give it over to Kathy. But please know this overrides all about kids and education. And I know what a difficult time it is in the world. It couldn't be a lousier economic cycle for a mayor to come forward and say, please increase your taxes. But I know these dollars are absolutely needed for great teaching and learning.
Thank you, Mayor. When I talked earlier, I have to tell you that in coming here from Brockton, I actually learned about your city a long time ago. And I learned about it coming from a poor city. We were advocates for what's called the Student Opportunity Act. And while that might not have helped Newton, I say that because you were a district that I studied. I studied it as a superintendent. I would look at Newton, I would call it a premier district. It was very metropolitan, a lot of differences between Brockton, but I looked at what you were doing in your classes. I looked at your class size. I looked at what you were spending on your students. I'll talk about some of this data. And this was some of the information that we used to get that passed in 2019 for equity in education. So coming here and understanding, and when I speak to audiences now, one of the things I like to go back to is actually talk about what you did 10 years ago when you actually passed an override in 2013. And you were good stewards of those dollars in a community that came together and said our schools are important, and here's why they were. You wanted to make sure you retained smaller class sizes, providing the kind of academic learning environments that supported social and emotional support for all our students. You brought in full-day kindergarten. You made sure the kindergarten program was supported with not only your teachers, but support staff in those classrooms for your littlest learners. You renovated at the time and expanded your elementary school buildings, Zervis, Ainger, and Cabot. You expanded technology, and this is back 10 years ago, in your programs K-12, when you knew that you needed to provide, as the world was changing, one-to-one devices, technology in the classroom for your teachers. At that time, you increased guidance and counseling services to support the growing mental health needs of your students. You implemented social justice initiatives to create more inclusive and equitable school communities. You were way ahead of your time. You still are very progressive. And districts look to places like Newton. And you retained high-quality, experienced, and committed teachers and staff. And that was certainly evidenced to me tonight when you hear Principal Nardelli tell you he's been committed here 30 years. When you look at your teachers, it is a well-known fact that when you hire, and if you look back at what we were doing in September, I have colleagues all around that were struggling to fill teaching positions. We had every teaching position filled by the time we opened those doors in September. And that is about, again, the commitment you make to make sure that you're paying fair wages, to make sure that you're getting the best teachers possible for your students along with your support staff in the schools. So where are we now? Are we showing the video? Okay. So we're here tonight to talk about the next generation of students, students that need the support of the Newton community. We have old and aging buildings, as you've heard the mayor and her staff talk this evening. We have changed expectations for graduates in today's global workforce. We have growing mental health needs of all our students and the need to access technology to create personalized learning environments in our classrooms to prepare our students for the integral role technology plays in the world today. I'm here to tell you that although many of us want to feel that the pandemic is over, and in many respects it is, it feels good. It feels good to be back to having even gatherings like this. But what isn't over in our classrooms today is the need to make sure that we do not take our foot off the pedal. That when we're talking about where there might have been during the pandemic loss of learning, making sure that we're providing additional support staff to meet the needs of every youngster in the Newton Public Schools. You were, again, smart enough to put into place interventionists to support our students, additional staff to support those classroom teachers, to make sure that the size of your classrooms, and I'm up there tonight taking the tour, counting the seats, and when I count 20 and 22 in a classroom, that's where you need to be to make sure that we're providing this for the generation of students that we want to make sure fully recovers from what has gone on the past 3 years and the impact on education. I like to look at graphs, and when I talk about your student-teacher ratios and your class sizes, when you look at Newton, and when you look at 10.8, that does not mean in every one of our classes. What we do is we take all of the teachers we have in the district, whether they're support teachers, interventionists, specialists, and that's where you come up with the 10.8. But again, when you're looking, the lowest, and I keep saying not a surprise, is Cambridge, the highest being Belmont, but you are 4th out of 14 with an average elementary classroom ratio of 20 students per teacher. Critical right now. Next slide, please. The per pupil expenditure. This is important. What are you spending per pupil when you put all of the costs together of what it takes to educate a student? And again, when you look at Newton, you are at just over $23,000 per student. You're really right in the middle, 7 out of 15. This is where, when we say 15, by the way, we're looking at some of communities that are geographically connected to you. Sometimes it's hard to find comparable districts to a city like Newton. So again, you're right in the middle, and again, someplace you do not want to lose ground. Next slide, please. This is impressive, your graduation and dropout rates. So again, your city, many different students come here. You have large programs. You have a large METCO program. And what you have done when we look at this at 90, what is Newton? It is 95.7, your graduation rates for your students. That is exceptionally high. And what that tells me is you are focused, your teachers, your leadership are focused to make sure that every student has an opportunity to graduate from the Newton Public Schools, to go on to college, career, job, or wherever it will lead them. And when I mean every student, it clearly is every student has personalized learning here and has these opportunities. Next. And again, look at this graph. When you look at your four-year college in the purple color, 86.2. And you look at the others, 2 years, post-secondary, some in work, military, and other. You know, this is, when I said to you a premier district, this is a successful district, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything. You move here, and these are your expectations for what you want your public schools to provide to your students. And I say to my team all the time, it's evident to me that when people move here, your first choice should be the Newton Public Schools. Next slide. This is an interesting slide. When you talk about outplaced students, so there are times, and we go through a process, you know, when we plan an individual educational plan for our youngsters, where we cannot meet the needs of some students and have to find an appropriate place for the students to get the education that they deserve. But when you look at 1.5% of students that are outplaced, and here's what I'm seeing when I have the opportunity to get into your schools. And I talk about you creating programs. You're a large enough district that when you create programs, and I talk about being at the Bigelow Middle School and looking at a program, a regular class, an English class, and you had deaf and hard of hearing students in that class. They were included in the class, they might have had additional supports, but they were with their peers in your community. That doesn't happen everywhere. Many times they become outplaced students, but you take a look at the needs of your students. So if you are a family moving in here, you can be assured that this school district wants to make sure that your child has an opportunity to be with their peers, their neighbors, their friends. They have an opportunity to be educated in the Newton Public Schools. And that comes with dollars. So, you know, we don't like to talk about that, but it does come with dollars to support those kinds of classrooms. And those are dollars well spent. In this here, I don't think you can pick up a newspaper or a research article. I'm going to be interested years to come because I do think we have a fighting chance to recover from this pandemic. But it is talking about isolation, whether it was talking about virtual learning. And this just didn't go on here. This went on all over our country, all over the world. And our students, it's created anxiety. It's created a situation where I'm sure many of you know in your own families, you know, things that you're paying attention to. So when you talk about, you know, the pandemic is not over for us, it is critical. And I hear people, and it's probably going to be a question this evening, people will say, and I've come to learn, you know, well, superintendent, you know, your numbers are down in the school district sometimes by about 800 youngsters out of, let's say, you know, 12,000. And that's happening everywhere. Demographically, that is happening with a lower birth rate, students entering school. But here's what we cannot do right now. Although there are ways to take a look at that, and when I say you want to be good stewards of those dollars, of your dollars, we want to do that, but we want to make sure, and you have taken a look at the needs and said, this is a time where, again, we need to make sure we have adjustment counselors. We need to make sure that we have guidance counselors. We have supports. So if a student becomes dysregulated, if they have to leave the classroom, you have a social and emotional interventionist that can work with the classroom teacher to make sure that the child is regulated and brought back into that classroom so there is not a loss of learning time. You have already put those supports in place. And again, this is not the time to be correcting for, yes, we are down, with again, some students throughout the district. But we have added that additional support throughout the district for the very reasons that we owe it to this generation of students. Next slide. And the override investment is a $4.5 million. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand this over to Aisha to share with you her in-depth knowledge of what does this override fully mean for our district.
Sneak out this way. Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everybody. How you doing? I have the pleasure of being able to talk about the school. That's my favorite thing, is to talk about the schools. And I'm looking at, as I look at Mark and I look at teachers who are here, I invite you to chime in. If there's something I miss or something you think that's important to highlight related to some of these topics today, because they're going to be familiar to the educators in the room. When we talk about why this override is important, what is it that it means for us? It means continuing to value and support those things that our families, the community, our educators care so deeply about to create the kind of environment where our students can thrive. And so some of those points include, of course, maintaining a strong and challenging academic program for our students, making sure that, as you know, in some communities, there are fewer and larger schools. Newton maintains a number, 15, currently, elementary schools, to have smaller schools scattered around the district. And as you know, because you've experienced it here, that lends itself to a sense of community and inclusivity when people can really get to know each other in that kind of an environment, and creates a school environment for students and staff and faculty who really know each other. They know the families coming up. When the kindergartner comes in that they met when they were just born, the family connections are really there. As Kathy mentioned, thinking about really having robust mental health supports in place. We're thinking about the whole child and thinking about what they need in order to learn and grow. Stressed brains, anxious brains, depressed brains struggle to learn. So we need to make sure that we're addressing all of our kids' needs, that we're meeting them where they're at when they come to school every day. And as you know, and as you've seen, modern, innovative, and readily accessible technology, we needed that technology during the pandemic, for sure. But our job, too, is to prepare our students for their futures. They're going out into the world to jobs that haven't even been invented yet. And our job is to get them ready, to prepare them in a myriad of ways to meet the challenges of their futures. And that includes being able to use technology effectively. So we think about our commitment. Our educators in the room can tell you this is our commitment every day. Making sure that we have small class sizes with personalized learning. Small class sizes matter because, as you know, think about what it is, the kind of experience that you want for your child. And I know as a parent, thinking about, first and foremost, I wanted my child to be known and loved for who they were. I wanted them to come to school and be known and appreciated. And that relationship with the educators is so important for creating motivation, for getting to know kids and meeting their needs. And so those small class sizes really help to support that to happen. We have specialist teachers to help provide a well-rounded curriculum that expose our children to the arts, visual arts, music. They have library class and physical education. These are important aspects. Some of your kids, their favorite day is the day that they have art class, or the day that they have phys ed. We have academic coordination across the district. We're lucky. I've worked in a number of different districts. This district having curriculum coordinators and the kinds of supports in place to really be up to date on pedagogy, up to date on content standards, to support the kind of professional learning for our teachers to continuously grow, helps our students. And finally, thinking about multiple pathways for diverse learners, making sure that we have a continuum of classes that expose students to a variety of different content areas and pathways for their future. It's pretty impressive in Newton. If I think back to when I was in high school in particular about what the kinds of classes, it was very tracked. You didn't have the whole, as many options, and now you think about the kinds of classes that students are encouraged to experiment and be exposed to in their high school years. It's pretty terrific. Again, thinking about the importance of inclusive and welcoming schools and school communities. Again, back to this point about our relatively smaller elementary schools. That is actually interesting to point out and talk about a little bit with regard to the point that Kathy made earlier about students, about our enrollment being lower. And so, and you look at the budget and say, well, why do you still have a high number of staff, or why did that number go up? Some of those numbers went up because we added positions to serve student needs. So you heard Kathy talk about full day K. Well, we added kindergarten aides as part of that program to support our youngest learners. Some of that, if we look at the smaller elementary schools, you can lose, when you have smaller elementary schools scattered around the district, there's a trade-off, and that comes in the form of efficiencies. And so losing students, when you have students who withdraw, say students move, they don't happen all in a clump in one grade in one school necessarily. So we have 15 schools and 6 grades in each. And those students are scattered across all of those. So you don't necessarily have a reduction in staffing that results proportionate to the number of students who are no longer in the Newton Public Schools. In-district programming to serve the needs of diverse learners. I feel like much of this has been discussed already, but this is so important. It's important that as many of our students, our Newton Public School students, are educated here in this community with their peers or cohorts. And over the last 10 years, and I think about, this is my 10th year here, so I came in just after the override and have been fortunate to see so many of these changes in schools. I was a principal at the Williams School. And thinking about the in-district programming that has been expanding to meet the needs of our learners and educate them here in the community, it's not only an inclusive thing, it's not only the right thing to do for our kids, it's also fiscally responsible. It actually saves the district money to educate our children in-house and to offer programs in the Newton Public Schools because it costs so much for students to attend out-of-district programs. We support ELL programs. We have more than 50 languages represented in the district. This population is actually, we've seen this grow over the course of this year, and we're excited to meet all of our students where they are and provide the English language learning support that our students need. And finally, we offer a variety of athletics, fine arts, clubs, and activities beyond what goes on in the academic classroom every day. How you doing, everybody? I get to stand and move around a little bit, so if you need to stand and stretch, you're listening to a lot of talking tonight. But I'm going to turn things over to Kathy again, so at least we'll mix it up with whose voices you're listening to.
Excuse me. Thanks, Aisha. I'm going to be quick with this because I've really talked about this, and having been a former adjustment counselor myself, I know what it feels like with a school leader, that if they need the support, if a student needs the support, to make sure that you have, and you look at guidance counselors, social workers, adjustment counselors, psychologists, social and emotional interventionists, programming, making sure we're having programming for students so they're resilient youngsters. They can handle stress and anxiety and some of those things that are really, part of life. And I think one of the most important things when I came here and heard about this, and again, if you're reading what I'm reading, people are struggling if they need to get outside counseling or family counseling or support for our students. But here we have a partnership with our city, with our community mental health organizations, and we are clearly supporting families to make sure that they can meet the needs of their family and their students, because again, our role is to make sure our kids are in school, learning, happy, included with their peers, and having that time in their life, whether they're young students, whether they're students moving on to secondary ed or to college beyond that, we need to make sure it's the best years of their lives. Next slide. Our commitment, and I'm really excited to have Stephen here this evening, so again, you have an opportunity if you have questions about this. But we talked about dedicated one-to-one device program. We need to keep this going in our schools. Interactive curriculum materials, sophisticated assessment tools, digital creation tools, access to content by text, audio, and video. And I think all of you know that our MCAS testing, again, is all required so that students have the technological skills they need to be successful. Next slide. So why the $4.5 million? Why is it needed for our operating budget? I don't have to tell anybody here running a home, looking at the rising costs, Haverhill exceeded our average yearly budget increase of 3.5%, whether it's transportation, and you know what's happening in the area of transportation, health insurance, commitment to, as we talked about, our in-district programs and our out-of-district tuition rates. We had a lot of funding, thank goodness. I hear the mayor talk about it all the time. They were able to provide services in the city because of the CARES Act, the ARPA funds. For us, it was the ESSER funding. It allowed us to immediately get that technology out to our families to increase that. Our building maintenance at the time, and I know Liam can tell you about what was done, and Josh, with your air purifiers, et cetera, to make sure we had state-of-the-art ventilation systems during COVID. And again, I can't say it enough, the mental health supports. And next slide. So what difference will this $4.5 million make for the district moving forward? And I started by saying you were very good stewards of those dollars 10 years ago, and that's why we're here now talking about how critical it is at this point. So this addition of $4.5 million in our operating budget, the Newton Public Schools, the largest amount in this override proposal. It allows this district to maintain our current programming and our services so we can build a budget that we will continue to have it sustainable over time. It's not unusual. I know there are communities that go to overrides, and you can look around at some of your surrounding communities every 2 to 3 years. So this is 10 years. We talked about the commitment, and we certainly need the support going forward. Next slide. Mayor?
Start thinking about your questions. I'm just going to make a couple more points, and then we're on to you. The logical first question for most people who live here is, so what's this going to cost me? Go to newtonma.gov/override. There's a calculator right there. Plug in your address, and you'll see exactly what the impact will be on you. Next slide. We've got two examples. It's kind of still breathtaking to me, but the median value of a single family home here in Newton is now, gasp, $1.2 million. If you happen to be the owner of a $1.2 million assessed home, the operating override kicks in immediately. Next year, starting July 2023, you'll see the impact on your quarterly taxes. The annual cost for next year, next fiscal year, would be $290. The Countryside and Franklin projects are a little bit different. We only start charging our taxpayers when we actually bond the projects. We still have a couple years of design left on both those schools, assuming a yes vote, so that the projects don't start for a few years, and then we only bond as the construction moves along. So it's feathered in over many years. The full impact of both schools combined will be on your tax bills 7 years from now. And if your home is valued at $1.2 million, that additional full cost would be $183. You'll see for a home valued at $750,000, it's $173 year one, and then by the time the full impact of the bonding is felt, it's another $110. There are two things that made me think long and hard whether to go to you, our voters, and say, would you consider voting yes for an override? One is just the timing is really tough. Inflation, recession, pandemic, hangover, war in Ukraine, you name it. It's national politics, the whole bit. It's just a really tough time. I'm actually on a different slide, Josh. Nope. Is there one? That's the one I wanted to be on. Thank you. The other is thinking about people who have very tight budgets or are on fixed incomes. With the help, thank you, City Council, I docketed and the City Council have already passed. We've doubled 7 of the tax assistance or tax deferral programs, and we're expanding 2 of them. Moving forward, actually, you need to go back, to that slide for 1 sec. Just so you know, this is, it's hard to read, sorry. It's on the website if you want to see it. What this is showing is actually the tax rates in Newton are fairly modest, but because our assessed values are so high, it does turn into substantial taxes. So I don't want to kid anybody about that. I'm mimicking what Kathy just said. We've only done 2 overrides in the history of Newton. The first one was 20 years ago. The last one was 10 years ago. We're at a critical moment here. I know I'm asking a lot of people, but I'm really hopeful that people will vote yes. We're behind many of our like communities, and I believe so deeply in this community, in this city, in our schools, and in our services, that I did want to bring this to all of you because of the investments made by those of us who lived here 20 years ago and 10 years ago. We have a wonderful community, and I do believe it's our time to step up and vote yes again. With that, what's on your mind? And thank you. I know it was a long haul to get through a lot of material. questions, concerns, issues? We'll start with you, and then I'll give you this. If I can ask a favor, kind of keep it short if you can. And if you have follow-up questions, we'll go around and come back to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Hi. A lot of great information tonight. Definitely learned a lot. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that information. The first question I have is relating to the override. So those dollar amounts, I see that Horace Mann is part of the operating override, right? So does that mean that Horace Mann will get $775,000 every year going forward?
Great question. Everybody understood it. So the Horace Mann project is tucked into the operating override. What we expect is the bonding will be for 30 years, and that'll be the annual cost of the bonding. And then 30 years from now, when the bonds are done, that opens up tax dollars to do whatever school or city building needs work then. I'm going to go back in time to 2013. We had 2 debt exclusion questions for 2 elementary schools, and we had an operating override, which also had $4.5 million of operating funds for the Newton Public Schools. It also tucked in, let's see, an elementary school, fire headquarters, Station 3, and the Wires Division. So we also tucked in capital programs into the operating override. It's essential to have those operating dollars to fix buildings, because you can tell we need work on lots of our buildings. That answer your question? Horace Mann will get the full amount of the bonding, and I'm going to ask Josh, what's our estimate right now of the total cost of the Horace Mann?
Thank you. So 23 million, little bit of some of it's construction, some of it's soft cost, but 23 million. So, Mayor, it might be helpful to explain the split between the 775 is going to cover a portion of the project, total cost, and then the other.
Thank you. Good reminder. So the total cost is 23 million for the project. We've tucked 13 million, do I have this right? $13 million of that 23 million into the override. The other 10 million we're using primarily free cash. That was a way to make the cost of the override palatable to all of us who need to vote yes. Does that help? Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. And I guess of course, as many of us were surprised and concerned about hearing the story of Countryside. And the addition proposed for Horace Mann here is going to be actually very low, basically in a ditch, in a space downhill where we all see water accumulating every spring. How is this being taken care of for the building? Thank you.
So the question is, do we have water problems here at Horace Mann, and will that be addressed in this work?
Certainly, we don't want to repeat history. So the Horace Mann School, we've done quite a bit of design work already. So part of that is onboarding our consultants. There's a surface water issue there, but there's not a subsurface water condition or subsurface water issue, meaning that it is a low point, but there is not a high water table. Over at Countryside, it's adjacent to the brook and the wetlands, so there's actually static water a mere couple feet below the surface in the back part of that site. Here, we don't have a water table. There's not a body of water underground. Here, we have surface water on top. And that's something, that's very doable for us to address. We also don't run into those issues, and we're obviously going to plan for this. We don't have the same issues with regards to being below the street to the point where we can't get sewer to run. So we're not going to have grinding, thank God. But those are all things that we are certainly going to address. The addition is not going to have a basement, unlike Countryside, which has a basement well below the water table. So we're going to build up We'll have our civil engineers. We're going to do additional borings. But the advantage is back when we did the project about 10 years ago, we did borings around the school, so we have good subsurface conditions now, including back in the bowl.
Other questions, ideas? You, and then we'll get to you.
I just need to first clarify the first question. You see, it's 20 some odd million, not the 775 that we saw. And what's the period of time that is going to be available to the school? Because I had a very different question when I thought it was 775, and I might have a follow-up.
So go back to the countryside and Franklin side. I just want to make it really crystal clear. It's like when you're buying your house, and let's say it's $1 million. You don't pay usually $1 million up front. What you do, maybe you've got a down payment, and then you're doing a mortgage payment, maybe over 30 years. Same thing. So countryside will be 61 million, Franklin 61 million. This is the 30-year, we will bond for 30 years. So the actual cost to the taxpayers annually are these dollars. Same thing with the Horace Mann project. It'll be 23 million. I'm going to use 10 million out of free cash. That means 13 million embedded here. Over 30 years. I'm trying to remember what. I think we used a 4% interest rate. That backs out to the $700,000 annual cost that will be absorbed by that. That helped. Yeah.
Because I was trying to understand how much money we were talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. So given that, and given the amount that's the bump up front, I think what would help most folks that haven't been following this as closely, maybe I'm not alone, is to understand the context of that in terms of the goals. Now, when this issue first came up years ago, there was discussion of like an assessment that was done at other schools to understand the needs. I haven't been able to follow this closely, so what happened with that? Is there a goal, and how close to the needs of the school does that $13 million get us? Just because, thank you.
Perfect. So as many of the familiar faces in the audience are aware, and others are not and are about to be, we've been busy. So we brought in an architect, Gene Raymond Associates, complemented by our owner's project manager, Tom Murphy, here tonight, somewhere in the audience, from NV5. That team has been partnering with the staff at Horace Mann. Mark has been involved quite a bit, and members of Newton Public Schools administration. We have a building committee, which has parents on it, that meets typically, we've been meeting monthly up until we made this announcement. So the assessment was done. We evaluated what we have. We evaluated where we're shy, meaning we identified all the spaces we have. We identified all the spaces we don't have. We identified which spaces are lacking. We identified which spaces don't have good adjacencies, that clustering, that neighborhood sense within the school. And the project that we've been working on is to address all of that. The addition provides all that additional space that we need. Some of the spaces, like the one we're in, will get repurposed for something else. Other things will move into that space. And then we're going to be doing a lot of work in the buildings phased over summers. But the interior work in the building will be to create breakout spaces, to move walls, to right-size classrooms, to create that clustering where we can. So yes, the needs assessment has been done, and what we're asking for is the funds to address what was generated from that needs assessment, complemented by the visioning work that we've done with the staff.
It is completely understandable if Horace Mann parents are suspicious and saying, so will enough money be spent? And is the 23 million enough to really address the needs that Mark, the educators, and the parents see in front of them? And our commitment is yes. The trickiest part about that is inflation, by the way.
Hi, thank you for the presentation tonight. You preempted many of my questions, so Nice work. I did have one question remaining, though, which is, a lot of the override is issues that I'm supportive of. I'm supportive of a Horace Mann extension, of street trees, of decarbonization. But I do want to ask why these are the items that require an override as opposed to some other set of projects or capital investments.
So there's a bit of an art here, and a lot of it came down to educators and department heads really listening hard. I've been mayor now, I'm coming to the end of the 5th year. What are the critical needs that I'm hearing over and over again that people who live here or work here are saying we need? I obviously also wanted people to vote yes, so I picked ones that I thought would reverberate, and I'm glad to hear that most of those you look at and you're nodding and going, that makes sense. There's certainly plenty of other needs here in the city, but by moving forward with this, it does take some pressure off the operating budget in the sense if we can move forward and we have an additional $1 million for parks, playgrounds, fields, that means I'm not trying to take something from another part of the budget to do that. So it does give you a little bit of breathing room if this moves forward for all the other things that you might say, but what about X or Y or Z? Because there certainly are plenty of things here that need attention and need dollars.
I just had a quick question about what happens if the override doesn't pass? Do you have a sense of what the priorities would be? Does this just all go away, or is there a way to roll it into the budget?
This is a tough one, so I'll answer really straight. The question is, so what if we get no votes on March 14th? Do it March 14th? These are all important initiatives. They all matter. Unlike the federal government, though, we have to have a balanced budget, so our revenues, our costs have to stay in line with our revenues. It just means all of these things get stretched out. We'll get to them eventually, but it's over a lot more years. The question was, what about the funding from the MSBA? Would we lose that money? We might. I would say if the countryside vote goes down, might try going back out for another override vote. You guys will help me decide, do you wait a couple years, maybe the economy picks up. But yes, that we would be in danger of losing a whole chunk of money. Other.
So if the override is no, what happens to the free cash that you set aside for Horace Mann?
So that money does free up. We can look at all the, there's going to be lots of disappointed people if the override passes, and a lot of people are going to say, but what about me for those dollars? And we'll figure it out. I end up proposing, a mayor proposes to the city council the uses of the free cash, and the city council ultimately votes. We'll all be in this together, and I always try to be really open about what I'm thinking about, and together as a community we'll figure out the priorities.
I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the free cash. Before we get started, thank you for the presentation tonight, and it's been really great experience getting to be involved as part of a member of the Horace Mann Building Committee and seeing the great designs that the architects have come with. We're very excited about that as a community. On the subject of the free cash, is that currently available? And I know that we've stalled the design process now as we wait for the override to pass. But if the free cash is in hand now, is there any reason why that can't be used to fund the design process, which I gather to complete design development and construction documents is about $600,000 for the design team as a whole? So if we have 10 million of that in hand now, can we spend some of that now to finance the design process so that when the override passes, fingers crossed, we can hit the streets ready with the design?
Another really interesting question. Again, to recap, most people, you have to be really in the weeds to understand even what the term free cash is. There's nothing free about it. It's taxpayer dollars, and what happens is the way the budget works is we have the school department, unlike the city side, very carefully, their budget this year is about $262 million. Liam will make absolutely sure that there's not almost a dollar unspent. I think last year you returned, it was less than $1,000. He returned $140 back to the city. That dropped down to what's called free cash. When our departments, Jim McGonigal and Shauna Sullivan, the way they do construction projects, they happen in May, June, July, August, September. Sometimes the dollars, they aren't able to spend it by the end of the fiscal year, which ends at the last day in June. So their extra dollars drop into free cash. We had something very peculiar happen this year, which is that a payment came in that we had been litigating forever and ever and ever, and it finally got paid. Was it Eversource? By Eversource. It came in. It's a one-time big deal. We still have to hang on to some of it in case it doesn't completely come through, but we've got this very unusual year with really high free cash. And you're asking, so why don't we spend some of it now so that when the voters vote yes? The problem is the voters may vote yes, they may not vote yes. So I don't want to invest in any of these projects, Countryside, Franklin, or Horace Mann, till we know we're going forward. It would be lovely if I were less risk averse. I'd bring that to the city council. I am too risk averse to invest the dollars now in case we don't get the yes vote. But I hear your rationale. Wouldn't that be great? Because so it would save us 6 months. I hear you. That's fine. I'll let, the question is for everybody, so where are we at a level of design for Countryside, Franklin, and Horace Mann?
Thank you, Mayor. So just before I say that, just want to remind folks that the schedule that we've put out there that's on our website, the fall of 2026, that accounts for the next few months working towards the vote in the spring. So we will not slip beyond that schedule as a result of these next few months. The Franklin School is also paused. We did the pre-feasibility work, got a sense as to project costs, the options, kind of high-level site options over there. Quite frankly, Horace Mann is a little further along than the Franklin School project. The Countryside School project, because we are in the MSBA pipeline, we have to keep moving, or we jeopardize losing the state funds. So we are still moving forward in that feasibility process through the MSBA pipeline, as they like to call it. That's also in feasibility. So all three projects are in various stages of feasibility, but again, Horace Mann is much further along than both Franklin or Countryside.
Other questions? Sure.
I just had a quick question about how, if the override passes, what this will mean for other schools that haven't been renovated or, like are in the pipeline for upgrades.
Liam or Josh, who wants to? Let's get Liam. Let's bring in Liam's vote. The question was, so we get the yes vote. We've done, in a way, Newton North was our last really big project. We've done NECP. We're moving forward with Lincoln Elliott. We get Zervis Cabot Anger is in the rear view mirror. We get these next 3 great projects. Now what for next projects, big ones, and I would also say small. I talked to a Mason Rice parent yesterday there's a bathroom that's driving that parent nuts, and why can't we get that bathroom fixed? So the big and small.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. Hi, good evening, everyone. Liam Hurley here. So good question. So just to hear the pipeline, and we have been busy. So just to reiterate, we've got NECP moving in just in about a month's time. After that will be Lincoln Elliott. In the pipeline, certainly right now, we're talking about obviously Countryside, Horace, Mann, and Franklin. If you've been following some of the school committee meetings that we have, we've also announced some feasibility money that the mayor has given to the school department to also look at Ward and Underwood. That's an area for us right after these projects that we really need to look at. Ward and Underwood are 2 of our smallest schools. They're both about 100 years old, and those are 2 schools that we're going to go through a planning process to look at what we need to do at those schools to really address the needs of those schools. And it's really kind of threefold there, really the educational impact, the enrollment, and certainly the facilities on those buildings. Beyond that, I'm actually part of a team, and we've actually got a few of the school committee members are also on basically a long-range planning team. So we'll be coming forward over time to basically put forward what does that look at over the next 10, even 20 years. What do we have? We have many buildings that really do need additional work. I'm really proud of the work that we've got right before us. This is going to put us out almost to the almost 2030s, but it's going to go beyond that as well. So we're going to continue that work, and more will be coming. Ward and Underwood.
I will also mention that we have a big, thick capital improvement plan just updated in October that does show very roughly all the different school buildings over how many years? Like, it goes out a long ways.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Maybe a question that's a little more selfish because I have a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, and a kindergartner coming through the school right now, and it's wonderful, and we have a great experience here. Construction is very disruptive. How is that going to be handled for the current students over the next 3-4 years?
Thank you very much. So construction. So we have done quite a bit of pre-planning already, working with our project architect and our owner's project manager, and we started the conversation in our building committees about how we're going to approach this project to ensure that we are creating a safe, welcoming, noise-free, dust-free environment. First thing that everybody should be aware of, although it's an old building, when we did do our work in 2014, the vast majority of the hazardous material was removed. We did a ton of work in this building on that front. There's a little bit left, but we're well aware of it, and it's predominantly in the ceiling above the boiler room. So from a hazardous material standpoint, we're in pretty good shape. Part of the reason why we're very focused on the option of building back in the bowl, for lack of a better name, is that for 2 reasons. One, it's a good connection to the building to create that flow in the adjacencies that we're after. But 2, it allows us to create a space or create the addition in an area where we feel we can kind of compartmentalize from the building. It has the kind of least impact. We looked at options in the back here. A lot of it had far greater impact on the operations, was much more challenging from a phasing standpoint. But specifically, we're going to be looking at a summer, a year, and then the following summer, so kind of 3 phases, if you will. First phase being getting our site secured, getting our foundations poured, ideally getting our steel up, kind of getting weather tight. Then we roll into the year where we're doing a lot of the addition work in the addition. The following summer is when things get really fun for us. As soon as the kids are out, quite literally the minute they are out of this building, we will start working to make the physical connection between the addition into the new building, and doing all of our interior work here. At the same time, we're doing things like ventilation flushes to get all the fresh air and to off-gas what little bit of VOC products are still out there, kind of glues, adhesives, things like that. But it is going to be our responsibility to very effectively communicate that to the entire parent community, the school community, the staff, the school committee. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of work left to do on that, but certainly happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you, Josh, for what you had to say at the beginning. I appreciate, I was in meetings where I think you were yelled at a lot. And I really appreciate what you had to say. I think it's really significant. I hope that everybody that's here representing the city realizes what a gem this school is. It's clear that I think Josh has gotten that. And I just really hope that everybody else has, like the teachers who I'm not even gonna look at, because what they've done for my kids is incredible. I grew up in Newton. I know a lot about other school districts through my work. This school is a gem. So please, when it comes to like those dollars that hopefully we will get, not just for this building, but also for the district as a whole, please continue to listen to them. They weren't listened to before. And we learned from that. You learned from that, and I so appreciate that. Please don't make that mistake again, okay? Please listen to them. But my question is, and I don't know where the mayor, oh, there you are, hi. What are you doing to convince others? Like, I think we have a vested interest in the override, and as do some others, but what other conversations are happening? What are you doing to convince everybody else?
First of all, I'd love to activate those in the room who are believers in this, because I can't do it alone. I need help. Please talk to neighbors and friends when you're out and about. And we're open to ideas, by the way. We're making ourselves available once, twice, 3 times a week. Kathy Smith tomorrow morning has a virtual Zoom meeting on the override. Give her a call. The sustainability team is meeting twice before the year end. Jim and Shauna are meeting twice virtually with folks. We're trying to get the word out. There are some restrictions about particularly what staff can and cannot do. We can respond to questions, they can respond to questions, but they can't push information out. There are some volunteers who are very active, and I encourage you to connect with them if that's your thing. And if you've got ideas about groups that I can go speak, anybody who's inviting me, yes. I'll be there. And if you've got ideas, just email me, say I'd love to talk for 5 minutes. I'll call you back, and I'll take any idea you have. But we're out and about. And there's we're putting a ton of material on the website, so as questions come in, people can find answers. But we're open to any idea you have. Let's go to you.
Thank you. I just want to add, since the mayor probably can't say this, but I can. I'm Marcia Tabankin, by the way. I'm a former Horace Mann student parent. And there is a group called Vote Yes for Newton. For those of you who haven't checked out the website, I would encourage you to go to it. It's voteyesfornewton.org. And it is the volunteer group that is supporting the override. So if you want to get involved and help spread the message, please go sign up on the website, and the campaign committee will reach out to you, or you can reach out to the committee, and we can share ideas and ways to get the message out in the next 4 months.
There's somebody over here.
Thanks. I was just wondering on the ideas, thinking about the empty nesters or people who perhaps approaching retirement years, and a pitch for those people. One of the things that's become apparent to me is the impact of a modern neighborhood school on local real estate values, on your home values. And you know, I've heard it a lot from my friends at Zervis and Ainger and Cabot, how they've watched their home value escalate more than what is typical due to those schools. Is there any way that we might be able to quantify that, perhaps, and you know, throw that out there as an incentive to those folks who don't have kids in the schools, or empty nesters, or perhaps approaching retirement? It might be a good pitch.
So there's a real yin and yang about this, which is one of the problems Newton has is our house prices are escalating so much that people can't move in. But when you have great schools and great school systems, your house prices escalate. So I'm having a little bit of cognitive dissonance about what's that. It's interesting. My first job out of college was doing economic forecasting, and I'm not sure we'll ever be able to figure out the cause and effect near Cabot, Zervis, and Ainger as their house prices went up, how much is related to the schools. But I believe it in my heart that if you have fabulous teachers and fabulous buildings that go along with it, the two together make Newton very attractive. And Josh also, I think, mentioned that when you think of upgrading the playground here, it's great for the kiddos, but Mark is very happy on weekends to have the neighborhood kids and others here and enjoying the playground. It becomes a community asset for everyone. So I'll see if I can poke around. If anybody finds a study that shows that cause and effect, that'd be interesting to see. I'll see if maybe somebody's done it, a correlation.
I'd just like to follow up on the notion that the design work can't be funded over the next 4 months because of being risk adverse. So, you know, the way I understand it, the school has New Public Schools has 4 capital projects ahead of this one, based on the CIP and based on, you know, what we know from the 2 debt exclusions on the screen. So, and then there are ones behind it, Ward and Underwood, that have been mentioned. So I would think that Horace Mann's place in that order would be about 4th out of those 6 identified projects. Now, my understanding of the work that would need to be done, and I might be wrong about this, so please correct me, but my understanding of the work that would need to be done for about $600,000 to potentially accelerate the project by 4 months is, you know, a series of things that wouldn't necessarily go stale. You know, I think some of the aspects of it might need to be updated if the override were to fail and the project were to be delayed, but we keep our spot as 4th out of those 6 projects, you know, because you said before that what might happen is that the timeline would have to be stretched out. So if that's all correct, you know, that the override fails, we would keep our place in line relative to those other capital improvement projects that the school department has coming down the pike, and that, you know, most of that $600,000, you know, would still be valid when we got to the project, whenever that might be. Again, why can't we find the $600,000 to potentially accelerate the project by 4 months?
I understand the question, and I understand both the heart and the head behind it. I'll still say pencils down for 4 more months, fingers crossed on March 14th, and we'll move forward then.
Out of those 6 projects?
So I'll also say what Josh said to you is that actually your design work is farther ahead than Franklin's. We're all gonna figure it out. Dollars won't be particularly the issue if all 3 questions pass. It'll be literally the capacity of the Horace Mann community writ large to do the thoughtful design work with the teams and the artwork and the architects and the construction schedule to move it along, even as we do the important work at Lincoln Elliott, which still has design work and construction, as well as Countryside, as well as New Cal, as well as Franklin, and there are both Liam's team and Josh's team have a lot of other projects to do, so these are the bigger ones. So we just we'll try to move everything along as expeditiously as we can, but do it thoughtfully and seriously. I'll also just tap on Emily Prenner's. School committee members tend to sometimes have specialties. Emily's specialties is facilities. She's sitting in so many school building committees that it's hard to imagine she has much of a personal life anymore. Ditto for Josh, ditto. So we care deeply about Horace Mann. There's important work to do here. We'll move it along as expeditiously as we can. I hear you. You get the first question and maybe the last. You'll be our bookend.
Can you explain the rationale behind why Countryside and Franklin has their own ballot questions, and while Horace Mann is lumped in with the other?
I thought somebody would ask that question. It's such a logical question. So why the heck is Horace Mann tucked into the operating override where Countryside and Franklin are standalone questions? Very logical question, I understand it. So this is more art than science. We looked at other communities who go out for overrides and what seems to succeed, as well as we looked at the 2013 successful one here. We ended up settling on 3 questions being the maximum that you could put in front of the voters for them to understand it and be willing to check enough boxes with yeses. So we ended up settling on 3. The Countryside one, which is embedded in the MSBA project, they like to have a positive vote from the community that the voters are willing to do it. With Franklin being almost the equivalent project, size project, those were the 2 logical ones to do for debt exclusion. The Horace Mann project is a smaller dollar amount, so it tucked in nicely into the operating override, and I like having a capital project, at least one, in the operating override. So that's where we tucked it in. I would also say, I think I said this earlier, but I'll repeat it, having permanent renovation dollars built into your taxes is good, because we certainly need it. So that was the logic.
Projects, and then in return, there's a risk that.
Well, there's a risk to all 3 of these questions.
But
one could argue that having Horace Mann tucked in with roads, which all polls show us the #1 issue here in Newton, as well as bringing out seniors who usually vote heavily in elections, and we've tucked in senior programming into the operating override. One might argue that the Horace Mann question is actually in the perfect position. Yeah. There's things, but I think it's in the right place. Why don't we close there? I'm going to let Kathy, again, a huge thank you. It was a long night, lots of questions. I appreciate the interest. I hope for the support. I thank Mark Nardelli in particular and all the teachers who had a long day and maybe an early morning tomorrow for being here, to the parents, to all the different amazing staff here, school committee members and city councilors. Kathy, why don't you do the last word?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. First of all, thank you, Principal Nardelli, and your wonderful community. I think the most important thing I heard, and I heard the mayor address this, if you have places where you would like us come and speak and share, we certainly have a busy schedule, but we're certainly willing to come to any opportunity, a coffee, a tea, to sit and really have some discussion. So thank you for caring about your kids. As I said, I studied this community a long time ago. I feel so privileged to be here, and I'm very, very hopeful that we will have a very positive outcome. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, team. Appreciate it. Thank you, Principal Nardelli.